Hello, everyone. This is Matt Haubrick of the Iowa Department of Transportation. I'm filling in today for the other Matt, Matt Hardy, the Program Director for Planning and Performance Management at AASHTO. Matt Hardy cannot join us today, but I'm glad to have the chance to be with you for this webinar. To all of you joining on the line, welcome. This is webinar 51 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series, sponsored by Federal Highway and AASHTO. Today, we're taking a look at the topic of TAM and TSMO, or Transportation Systems Management and Operations. We have presented webinars in this series every 2 months going back to 2012 on a variety of topics in asset management. Over the summer, we had a special mini-series on the TAM Guidebook Club with 8 webinars on the updated AASHTO Asset Management Guide. If you missed it, I encourage you to go back and look it up on the AASHTO TAM portal. Also, make a special plug for another mini-series that we had earlier in the year about improving your next TAMP. For many of the states and other agencies who are working on updating asset management plans, that would also be a great series of presentations to review. On the AASHTO TAM portal, you'll find more information about this webinar series. You can just visit tam-portal.com and click Events in the main menu, and that will take you to the list of events, including this webinar series. From there, you can also register for upcoming webinars as they are announced. And you'll find archives of our previous webinars, as well as links to videos and slides from today's webinar that will be posted there on that site. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics, or you have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using this webinar's Q&A feature. That's what we'll be using for all of the Q&A through today's webinar. We will answer all the questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So we're looking forward to your questions. And now I'll turn it over to Steve Gay for a welcome to you all on behalf of our co-sponsor, FHWA. Steve.
Thank you, Matt. FHWA, in cooperation with AASHTO, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. We are particularly happy to see you all join us for this 51st webinar. Today, looking at transportation asset management in Tismo. I'd like to welcome all the Tismo colleagues to this TAM webinar series. Whether your background is in TAM or Tismo, I believe you will enjoy today's webinar. I'm looking forward to hearing from today's presenters, and I know we got a lot to cover. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Will Duke of Spy Pond Partners to share our agenda and objectives for today's webinar. Will?
Thanks, Steve. As he introduced, I'm Will Duke with Spy Pond Partners, subbing in for Yana Park, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but I'm really excited to be here with you all and to support AASHTO and FHWA with this webinar. Today I'll cover our objectives and agenda and get us right into the presentations. The purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are building on our working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to TAM and TSMO, and to begin to apply this knowledge in order to answer the following questions. What approaches are agencies taking to leverage TSMO in their TAM processes and programs? What benefits can an agency expect to apply? What benefits can an agency expect to in applying the TAM approach to managing its ITS and other TSMO assets? And what are some key lessons learned for agencies as they look to better integrate TAM and TSMO? And of course, we always want to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. So for today's agenda, we'll start with an overview from Steve Gay and Joe Gregory from FHWA. Then we'll hear from the Iowa DOT Director, Scott Marlar, on TAM and TSMO at Iowa. Scott's presentation is pre-recorded, so Matt's going to be playing another role here in taking questions on Scott's behalf. In our next agency presentation, we'll also hear from Jamie Mackey and Tyler Lang of the Utah DOT. Also, Natalie Becker of the North Central Texas Council of Governments will wrap up our presentations for this webinar. So again, just another reminder that if you have any comments or questions throughout the presentation, please use that Q&A feature of the webinar control panel at any time, and hopefully we'll be able to get to those at the end of the presentations. And in response to the most frequently asked questions, yes, the slides will be available after the webinar today, and the videos will be too. So with that, let's get started with our introductory presentation from Steve Gay and the FHWA. And you all know Steve Gay as our host and sponsor on this webinar series, and as FHWA's lead for asset management and performance management. But I would like to introduce Joe Gregory. Joe currently manages the organizing for Tismo efforts for the FHWA Office of Operations. He also leads initiatives that connect TAM and TSMO. He has served with the FHWA for over 20 years, holding assignments in headquarters and in both federal aid and federal lands offices. And prior to coming to the Office of Operations, Joe managed the pavement preservation program for the former FHWA Office of Asset Management. Some of his current efforts involve communicating the connections and opportunities for collaboration between Tismo and other disciplines, including asset management, as well as applying asset management principles to Tismo assets. Now, I'll turn it over to Steve and Joe.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to hit a couple points here, and those who've worked with me in the past with asset management, you know, a lot of this is very familiar with you. You know, as it says in statute, state DOTs are to develop asset management plans to improve or preserve the condition of the assets and the performance of the network. And then it goes on to include a definition for asset management, and I'm paraphrasing. It's a strategic and systematic process of managing your system over the long term at the least practical cost. And it talks about assets having a structured sequence of maintenance, preservation, rehab to do that. I think most importantly, it's looking at your role in your DOT or your organization and your responsibility to the public as you manage the assets and the performance of the network. Where is the best place to put the money? I know it seemed to a comment that Mary Peters, a former administrator quite a few years ago and secretary, used to say, if your agency would get an additional dollar, well, let's say $100,000 or $1 million, where would be the best place for you to invest it? And I'm going to pass it to Joe Gregory. And Joe and I have been working together for quite a few years now, Joe. And then pass it to you, because I know the asset management people don't often hear from the Tismo folks, and vice versa. It's all yours, Joe.
All right, thanks so much, Steve. So just as a quick check, can you all see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just want to make sure we're good there. So yeah, thanks so much, Steve, and thank you all for the opportunity just to speak today. So my role here is just to maybe kick things off at somewhat at a high level, just kind of give you an insight in terms of what we're thinking nationally in terms of the potential connections between Tismo and asset management. And assuming that I'm speaking primarily to an asset management audience, I'm going to emphasize Tismo quite a bit here, and just making sure we all understand what that is, and just maybe some potential connection opportunities before I turn it over to our other speakers. So with that, here's the official definition of Tismo. So it's in our legislation. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it really focuses on utilizing the set of strategies to optimize the performance of the existing system. It talks about having both a multimodal component, it's cross-jurisdictional, it focuses on aspects like security, safety, and reliability of the transportation system. So this definition is a bit of a mouthful, but we're really looking to maximize, or as they say, optimize the performance of the existing transportation system before you start talking about adding additional capacity. There's definitely been a need for that in recent years. But basically, just trying to hit some of the highlights here. When we're talking about Tismo, we're talking about just providing an approach that applies these operational improvements. Again, before we start talking about adding capacity, we're talking about not just one strategy, but just an integrated set of strategies. I'll go over what some of those examples may be. But it's basically looking at implementing some low cost or even cost effective solutions. It talks about balancing supply and demand of the traffic that's going on there, and just making sure these solutions are flexible just to meet these changing conditions. And then, again, like I said, we can apply Tismo to existing transportation facilities or even designing new facilities as well. So we don't really say that Tismo competes with capacity projects, but it complements them. So in some cases, there's going to be a need for extra lanes. There's going to be a need for even a brand new road. But Tismo can provide an opportunity to just stretch that dollar by adding on strategies on top of that to extend the service life of this new capacity. So, and you see right here, this is what is Tismo website. It gets into much more detail in terms of what it is and what some of the opportunities are as well. So here's a list of some potential Tismo strategies that we're talking about. It's not meant to be all-inclusive, but just kind of give you a sense for what it is we're talking about. So if you look at the column on the left, these are strategies that have been around for a while that most, if not all, agencies are already utilizing them. Work zone management, incident management, road weather, signal coordination, travel information, like real-time travel information, ramp access management. So we're talking about those as well, but we're also talking about some that are potentially newer, maybe even emerging, like congestion pricing, integrated corridor management. We're also talking about looking at other modes as well, because one of the things that when we go out to our state and local partners, one of the key questions that we try to ask is, okay, who's not in the room that you think should be? A lot of times, the group will answer, in reference to the most, like our transit partners, our bike and ped community, our freight community. So those management of those other modes, are part of the whole Tismo toolkit. But also we have some that are a bit unique that may be even driven by the private sector, like connected automated vehicles and automated demand. Those can have impacts on how infrastructure owner-operator can makes their decisions in terms of how they maximize the performance of their system. So that's just kind of give you an overview in terms of what we mean by when we talk about Tismo. With asset management, just kind of switching gears a little bit, we're talking about maintaining the infrastructure asset system, maintaining state of good repair, improving state of good repair even, managing the long-term network at a minimum practical cost. There's a lot of talk about in terms of managing risk as well, and then there's certain performance measures that are used as key indicators. But with asset management, we're talking about preserving our assets and minimizing the whole life costs, and just really like what Steve Gay initially said, trying to maximize the return on our investment. So you see a lot of overlap in terms of what we're talking about in terms of asset management and Tismo. And that's something that's key I want to drive home in that. A lot of times when I talk to our stakeholders, I say that asset management and Tismo, it's basically taking the same approach, but on different focus areas. So we're asset management, we're talking about the condition of the assets. Tismo, we're talking about safety, mobility, reliability of the system, but they both, take essentially a similar approach where, it's a performance-based approach, it's data-driven, and we're trying to maximize the return on our investments. Now, the opportunities that we usually try to see and how we connect the two, it's kind of a two-way street. So in one way, we're talking about applying asset management to Tismo. So when I say that, it's recognizing that in the Tismo world, a lot of the focus over the years has been primarily on deploying technology. If you have issues on non-recurring congestion, for example, you deploy ITS devices like ramp meters or DMS signs, things like that. And then questions like, okay, how do we maintain these devices once they're on our system, becomes more of an afterthought. And those of you who have been in the asset management world for years can see the parallels, because that's how asset management got started when we started building our interface system, and our focus was on construction, and then maintenance was still an afterthought. And then you recognize that, okay, just like in the world of pavements and bridges, there is a significant investment in technology that our state and local DOTs have. So the question, so what we try to do is try to apply those principles that were learned in asset management to these Tismo assets like ITS and signals, for example. But the other side of the coin is applying Tismo to asset management. And what I mean by that is typically in asset management, the primary focus has been on pavement and bridges. And I know in recent years it's starting to expand, such as in terms of geotech, culverts, for an example, but just also really looking for opportunities to incorporate those Tismo assets into the TAM. As well. So, I mean, obviously, they're not required to do that, but it's something that we as Federal Highways try to encourage and to look for opportunities to do so. And then there's another opportunity that we always try to bring up is connecting the TAMs and the Tismo plans. In recent years, a lot of our state DOTs, even local DOTs, have started to develop their NFTOs have even started to develop their own Tismo plans, just to really look at this strategically. But we always say that when we develop our Tismo plans, where are the opportunities to add hooks into it, for lack of a better term. So where are the connection points between the Tismo and the TAM, or the Tismo and the state freight plan, or the safety plan, or the long range plan? So are there opportunities to connect these two plans and just really get that dialogue going between the two communities? So that's what we're really trying to look at, advance this conversation on a national level. Here's some resources. They said you're gonna have some slides afterwards, so I won't go through them spend too much time on them, but you have NHI training, you have opportunities for technical assistance. We do have an asset management for operations website that we're trying to update regularly, just for those who are interested. We do have a fact sheet. One of the efforts we're trying to do is trying to connect Tismo with other disciplines. So we're working on material with that right now. Right now we have a fact sheet for asset management. So it's a two-page fact sheet just to start the conversation between the asset management and the Tismo champion. So that's just something just to keep in mind. So I know I don't know if we're saving questions for the end or not, but that's just what I want to share right now, just to get the ball rolling. So I don't know, Steve, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, thanks a lot there, Joe. I think you touched on some important issues, and I want to hear from the presenters. And I think a key issue is to think about what should be pulled into the TAM from the Tismo side of things. So I'm going to pass it to you, Will. Thanks there, Joe.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for those introductory comments. I think that's a great way to get this discussion going. As we move forward, again, just another reminder that you can offer your questions to our speakers through the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure those are passed along. And next, we'll be hearing from Scott Marlar, the director of the Iowa Department of Transportation. Scott had to pre-record his presentation for us today, and Matt will be sort of subbing in to field some of the questions if you have any. So we really appreciate him being available for us in that manner as well. Scott became the Iowa DOT director in February 2020. He has worked for the Iowa DOT for over 23 years with experience in traffic operations, highway project development, regulatory compliance, and the natural environment. Scott has been active in leadership development and workforce planning and has also been instrumental in preparing for automated transportation and advanced technologies. Scott is also an active member of several AASHTO and TRB committees. In particular, he's focused on transportation operations and, again, advanced technologies. He has served on a national technical committee for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, an expert panel for the TRB, a course development committee for the National Highway Institute as well. Scott has also served on governors' councils and other state of Iowa task forces. And as I mentioned earlier, Scott won't be able to join us live today, but he has agreed to this pre-recorded presentation. And again, we thank Matt, who will be on hand to field any questions. So let's cue the video.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Marlar. I'm the director of the Iowa Department of Transportation. It's my pleasure to be here with you today virtually. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm very excited to share with you some thoughts here today on the FHWA AASHTO joint webinar on transportation asset management. I wanted to share a few perspectives on these topics, really coming from the Iowa perspective. In Iowa, we envision the safest, smartest transportation system in the nation, one that's made to last. And to do that, we're really focused on the intersection between Tismo, or Transportation Systems Management and Operations, and TAM, Transportation Asset Management. Those are a lot of words, so let's talk a little bit about definitions. When it comes to Tismo, what we're talking about is a coordinated approach to managing and operating our roadways, as it says here, as safely and efficiently as possible. Tismo is really focused on our existing infrastructure and really how can we increase safety and maximize flow. Asset management, as you all know, is also a strategic approach. It's really focused on our infrastructure, and the goals of both of these really is performance of our system, not only increasing safety, but increasing the performance. And we really are using data. All of us are using the data from our operations in a feedback loop to inform our investment decisions. So in Iowa, when we think about Tismo, when we talk about Tismo, we're talking about safety, mobility, and economics. These broadly are the underpinnings of really why we're interested to begin with. So I'm going to start with safety. Now, last year, many of you are I'm sure aware, we saw actually an uptick in the number of fatalities across the nation. 38,680 fatalities last year in 2020. In Iowa, that number is 338 in 2020. We've also been averaging more than 3,000 incidents per month, 61 minutes to clear lanes. That's way too long to clear lanes. Why? Because every minute counts. This is what we say in Iowa is true not only for Iowa, but it's true across the entire nation. In an Iowa perspective, again, on what we call the congestion pie chart, we know that our particular roadway network in Iowa, what we're suffering from is really non-recurrent congestion. In fact, it's about 72% of the congestion that's experienced on Iowa roadways. This is pretty important to understand because that's how we began to fashion some of the solutions that we need to look at from a Tismo perspective. In terms of efficiency and economics, we know that there's more than $600 billion worth of goods moving in and out of Iowa on an annual basis. Across the nation, most of these goods are being shipped by truck. That number is just over 70%. In Iowa, that number is just over 80%. Iowa's a freight state. We're a trucking state. We have 20,000 trucking companies that are headquartered right here in Iowa. And what's most concerning when we look at statistics like these, the volumes are projected to grow, volumes of truck tonnage specifically. So this is not true not only in Iowa, but it's true with many of our states across the nation. So we started looking at how can we improve the transportation system in Iowa, how can we manage it better, how can we operate it better, and we really developed what's here called the Iowa model. I know there's actually been some projects that have taken this Iowa model and extrapolated it a little more broadly to different national models. It's this three-part strategic, programmatic, and tactical. Now, these are really the underpinnings of how we've approached our planning for operations. We went further to break those down into what we call service layers, and here they are. We have 8 service layers in Iowa. Service layers has essentially a mini plan associated with it that helps guide and inform the work we're doing here in Iowa on a Tismo basis. What I like to say is, if you look at any of these layers, I'll pick one out. Let's say cooperative automated transportation. There's a lot going on with cooperative automated transportation in Iowa and in the nation right now. There's a lot of cool things happening. Frankly, we don't care how cool it is. The reason we talk about these things is, what can we do to keep people safe, to efficiently move product and goods and people across our nation and across our state's roads? This is why we care about what's happening. Now, let me shift gears, talk a little bit about asset management. So in Iowa, our TAM does these things you see right here. It helps us build, preserve, operate, maintain, upgrade, and where we need to, expand the transportation system more cost effectively. This is really about performance, and I want to say that this idea of customers is really what has underpinned our asset management approach. It's really thinking about those who are traveling on our roads and highways, not necessarily just our procedures or our processes alone. From a planning perspective, this is how we began to stitch it all together. I know that our graphic here has some busyness associated with it, but I'll tell you, without this type of strategic thinking about how all the parts and pieces fit, it's impossible to deliver our asset management like we need to. But it's not only from our planning perspective, it's also from our structures internal. So what you see here is how we've organized ourselves to deliver our transportation asset management plans. We call this our governance structure in Iowa. And what does this do? Ultimately, this helps us drive the outcomes that we're looking for. Those outcomes of more safety, more efficiency, getting people and goods to their destination safely, quickly, on time. These are the kinds of things that have driven this TAM governance structure right here. So let's begin to kind of stitch these things together. What is the interrelationship between asset management and Tismo? And I want to give you some Iowa perspectives here. So we're looking at tools, screening. We have something called ICE. And what ICE is an infrastructure condition index. These are the tools, some of the tools that we use. This is one of them, ICE. And we took that further and added some operations elements into our infrastructure condition index. We call it ICE Ops. We wanted to intentionally combine and intersect those two. So not only do you see, for example, some condition things, you also see AADT and crash rates and event center proximity, freight network mileage. These are things we wanted to stitch together on purpose to help us understand that intersection of our operations and our asset management. So in addition to tools, we have plans. We've developed an interstate investment plan. As you see on this slide, it's a fiscally constrained plan for all of our interstate routes. What we like to say is we developed a plan for every segment, and that's really what the focus has been of our interstate investment plan. Other tools like integrated corridor management, for those of you who work and are knowledgeable in the Tismo world, this will not be an unusual term. ICM is what we call it for short. Again, what ICM does for us, it allows us to use the existing infrastructure that we already have to provide more service across the board. An example that we've had lately in Iowa is we're actually working on a project, an ICM project in the Des Moines area. And this has been a pretty extensive project with many local partners really at the table. A success story for us so far. We've got a lot further to go on this pathway of ICM, and we're not, by any means, we're not done yet with that. But those are some of the perspectives from Iowa. Another tool that we use is something we call in Iowa project prioritization. Is it a good fit? Is the project good value? and when can we deliver it? It seems simple to talk about it in these cascading funnel diagram that you see right here, and that ultimately that's what gets programmed. I can tell you it is not simple to actually execute this in the real world, but these are some of the ways that we begin to intersect our asset management with our operations. Here is one of the reasons it's not simple. Here's our actual ranking, the actual rankings that we use in our project prioritization and scoping tool. So as you scan around this circle, you'll see that we've given different percentages, not only to the infrastructure, but also to the operations. This is not easy to do. This is kind of like a family meeting to decide which of your kids you can afford to send to college. It's just not easy to do this kind of thing. But this is how we ended up through some pretty healthy and rigorous, not only debate, but also some criteria that we laid out. Ultimately, this has led us to a policy approach. This policy approach that we call right-sizing policy. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of an NCHRP report number 917, which had kind of laid out some of the concept of this right-sizing policy. Right-sizing is really about that sweet spot of investment versus need. It's not overbuilding, it's not underbuilding, it's not overinvesting or underinvesting. It's really that sweet spot of where can we get the best return on our investment. We call that right-sizing. And that's also, if you think about an operations perspective, that's also how we avoid the traps of ribbon cuttings. Ribbon cuttings are very popular, and there is a push to increase capacity through more pavement, but often that's not necessarily the answer when there might be operation solutions that can actually get more capacity out of the system that we already have. That sweet spot's what we're looking for. We think a policy approach of right sizing will help us get there. Okay, so let me sum up here. Asset management and Tismo, they're both critical for what we do at DOTs. Together, they provide a very powerful insight and they provide strategies to help us serve all of our users. As you saw here, Iowa DOT has been actively working on it. And we think that these types of combined approaches, they're really what set the stage for our success as an agency here in Iowa. And I would even extrapolate to success across the nation as we think about all of our departments of transportation and the highway systems that we manage. Thank you so much for entertaining my virtual presentation here today. Again, I'm sorry I could not be with you in person. I wish you much luck and much great conversation here on your webinar. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, a big thank you to Scott for recording that presentation and Matt for being here to help with answering any questions that people may have coming from that. But next we'll hear from Jamie Mackey and Tyler Lang from the Utah DOT. Jamie's a PE and PTOE, and she is a freeway operations manager for the Utah Department of Transportation, overseeing the operation of ramp meters, express lanes, and over 700 data collection sites. She has 16 years of transportation operations experience and specializes in data analytics, performance management, and ITS asset management. In her previous role as a signal operations engineer, she played an integral role in the development of Utah's ATS-PMs, or automated traffic signal performance measures. And Tyler is a registered PE in Utah and California, and also a registered professional traffic operations engineer. He has over 20 years of engineering experience, most of which has been spent in the fields of traffic management, traffic operations, and intelligent transportation systems. Tyler is currently working on the statewide working as the statewide ITS program manager, and I'll turn it over to the two of you. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right, well, we're excited to be here to talk about Tismo, and we're focusing more specifically on ITS asset management in our presentation, not necessarily TAM as a whole, but the ITS aspect of it, because that's kind of our areas of expertise here. And so just to give a little outline of what we'll cover, I'll give a little overview of Utah and UDOT in general, just to give some context to our presentation in that regard. And I'll touch on our Tismo efforts to date and kind of where we're headed with Tismo, and give a little breakdown of ITS at UDOT. And then Jamie Mackey will take over and talk in more detail about ITS asset management, what we're doing around that, and where we're headed with that. So Utah is a smaller state. It has about 3.2 million residents. But the interesting thing about it is that nearly 80% of the population lives within a 100-mile stretch, what we call the Wasatch Front, that goes from Ogden, Utah to the north through Salt Lake City down to Provo in the south. And it's a very narrow area as well. It's confined by 2 mountain ranges and a big lake that you may have heard of. So we have a lot of issues that we deal with in terms of congestion and lots of things where Tismo strategies are needed. We have 4 regions. Our top 3 regions are the most urban ones. The lowest region, which is biggest in land size, has the least amount of people, but also gets a lot of travel because it's home to the 5 big national parks that exist in Utah. UDOT is fairly lean in terms of state employees. We have 1,600 actual state employees, and so we rely very heavily on our consultant community to help accomplish what we do. So just to touch on a little bit on our Tismo plan development and where we've gone with that, we really started diving into it in early 2018, and we started by interviewing our senior leadership and getting their feedback on what they knew about Tismo, what they thought about Tismo, and where they thought we should go with it. We documented a lot of the things that came out of those interviews and created a business case for Tismo at UDOT. Once we ran that business case by them and got their approval, we rolled it out statewide. And then towards the end of 2019, we had a major reorganization in the department where we added an additional deputy director and sort of divided the department on the lines of having an area focused more on planning and then an area focused on engineering and construction. And so we made sure that this business case we developed aligned with that new reorg, and then moved forward with having some workshops that we did statewide with many people throughout UDOT to really educate them about Tismo. It was a relatively unknown term department-wide, and so our purpose was to build awareness and engage UDOT on Tismo and how it applied to each of their jobs and responsibilities. From those workshops, we continued to think on what we should do next with Tismo. We decided that we needed to create some tools that could be integrated into our project process in particular, and I'll talk a little bit more about those here in a minute. And we developed additional resources, cut sheets, as it says on this slide here, that basically outlined what Tismo means to all the various areas and divisions within UDOT. And then we did another round of workshops to roll out those tools. So our next steps, which is where we're at now, is one of the things that really came out of the workshops and the interviews and all the things that we did. Many people hear the word Tismo or the acronym Tismo, and it's hard to relate to. They don't really understand what it means, and so we've brainstormed and thought really hard. How can we better message Tismo? And I'll talk more about what we came to in the next slide here. We also saw a need to continue to integrate TSMO principles into our existing processes and empower other champions throughout the department to be champions of TSMO. One of the things that I'll say came out of our meetings with our senior leaders is they didn't want to create a TSMO division within UDOT. They leaned more towards, let's just infiltrate it throughout the department. And so that's the strategy that we've adopted and are moving forward with. And in order to help with that, we are doing things to try and enhance our internal communications. And then lastly, we want to reach out to our partners and other stakeholders that we work with. So transitioning this messaging, we've come up with the term operations readiness. This is how we are messaging TSMO moving forward. And what we mean by operations readiness is really having operations as an integral part of the entire life cycle of what we do as a department, which is build and maintain a transportation system, and really focus on safety and reliability as, main tenets of what we're trying to do as a department. And really what we're looking to do, as it says in the second bullet point here, is standardize optimization of operations and management of our system in parallel with, as was kind of mentioned earlier, with building out our system through traditional construction projects, not competing with them, but having them supplement and even improve those types of projects. So there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to talk through all of this, but the main point here is what you see in blue is our existing project development process. What you see in orange is the items that we're looking to integrate into that process. It includes an operations review that happens at the concept level of projects. And it's really just a simple checklist of items that the teams developing these concepts can look at to make sure that they're appropriately addressing operational needs with their projects. And then making sure that that carries throughout the entire process, and at the end, before a project goes out to advertisement, having some sort of sign off or buy off that yes, operations was appropriately addressed in this project. And then after the project is done, documenting any lessons learned, what specifically was done, updating master plans, and then creating a plan for life cycle replacement of any items that were included in the project. So this is just a little snapshot of the document that is fairly simple. Like I said, just a checklist to make sure that project teams are looking at the various items that impact operations, and looking at what's existing, what needs to be preserved, what's planned for that area that their project is occurring in, what traffic and safety items can they get a jump start on, multimodal considerations, maintenance considerations, and last but not least, what do our partners need in this project area. Empowering internal champions is a key part of our next phase here. We've identified the various areas that touch on our transportation system, and we're wanting to identify key personnel that can help move these things forward. Again, enhancing our internal communications through additional web resources. We have some platforms that exist that our staff go to for training and information that we're looking to develop tools and videos and other things for expanding our GIS resources. I'll touch on that in a minute here. And then we really have a lot of robust data that comes into the department that we can leverage to really help promote operations that we're looking to enhance. And then finally, conducting stakeholder outreach, working with our MPOs, working with our first responders, and the people that impact our system on a day-to-day basis, and really getting them to buy into this operations readiness concept and process. So just to do a little overview, as I said, we're going to focus more on the ITS side of things. This is how our ITS at UDOT currently breaks out. And you see at the bottom in italics traffic signals. We actually have been moving more towards considering our traffic signals as part of our ITS system. And we're even calling them ITS assets. And it's in italics there because that's over 1,300 traffic signals that we own as a state. There's about double that if you consider all the signals locally. And one of the unique things about UDOT is we work under the same platform, the same system as our locals do. So we're able to talk to each other's signals. We're even able to change the timing on each other's signals. And it's a very collaborative environment in that world. So we did some reorganization internally in the traffic management division to organize better for ITS within the last few years. We have an ITS deployment and maintenance group that I manage. Jamie Mackey, who will be speaking here in a little bit, manages our freeway operations. Blaine Leonard, who many of you know, is over our transportation technology group. And Mark Taylor, who I'm sure many of you know as well, is over traffic signals. And then we work very closely with our IT department, to make sure our fiber network is operating and functional. Something that we've developed in conjunction with our Tismo efforts is a more available and robust ITS master plan. We have a GIS map that was developed in close coordination with our region personnel. We basically had them identify where are your problem spots, and then we came up with technology solutions to mitigate those problems that they're having, and that was the basis for our master plan. And this is an ongoing effort that is continuing to be updated. We also have a very robust fiber map. Lynn Yoakum, who's our fiber manager, is very proactive in partnering with telecoms and looking for funding to continually expand our fiber network, and that's been a great boon for us as a department to have that capability to communicate with our ITS devices in virtually every place in the state. So I'm going to turn the time over to Jamie now to talk more about asset management.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. So I'm going to cover kind of the history of ITS funding at UDOT, and then a couple ways that we're trying to track all of our ITS assets. And when I say ITS assets, I really mean the electronic devices that we use for CCTV and our dynamic message signs, ramp metering. It's not really the poles so much, or any of that other type of infrastructure. And then where we're headed. So in 2002, Salt Lake hosted the Olympics, and that was really how ITS was introduced to us here in Utah. At that time, we were given about $800,000 a year, and we were just kind of chugging on by, but we weren't really at that replacement point anymore, and so it was sort of fine. In 2016, UDOT recognized that ITS assets really needed to be a tier 1 asset, right up there with roads and bridges. And at that point, we received $3 million in dedicated funding annually. And then over the years, that's increased to about $6 million. And I'm going to talk right now about that 2019 end-of-life assessment that really helped us get a little bit more funding. So becoming a tier 1 asset meant that they thought we could suddenly answer all these questions about our system that we couldn't. And so this is an example of a kind of back of the envelope thing we did in coordination with all of our technicians that are in the field every day, and they really understand this. I know it's complicated, but if you look at the little green bar, all we really did was we wrote down every single device we needed to eventually replace, got a quantity, and then kind of planned what we might need to replace every single year. And that resulted in this big summary image here where we've got our various ITS groups, our freeway operations group, our lighting group, and everybody kind of figured out what they would really need in funding to be able to maintain our devices at a certain reliable level of operation. And that came out to about $10 million. And if you remember at the time, we were receiving about less than $5 million. And with this conversation, they agreed to increase our annual funding to $6 million. But the questions are still coming to us about how we know and how do we quantify our assets, and we're still not quite there yet. So a couple things we've learned about ITS assets relative to those other tier 1 assets of pavements and bridges are that those strategies that are established and have been used forever really don't apply to us very well. Our assets don't degrade in place. It's very common for a controller or some other device to move around the state, come in and out of labs as they need to be replaced. And so what do you do when you buy 50 different traffic signal controllers and you know you need to replace them, but you have no idea where the oldest ones are, or the ones that have had the least, haven't worked as well and have more work orders associated with them. The other thing that we've learned is that ITS assets have really variable end of life reasons. So it might just be old, but it could also not be supported by a vendor anymore, or maybe we're buying a new system that won't be compatible with it. And so there's kind of that thought process of what makes an end of life decision for an asset. Those are all really different. So the other way we've been trying to track our assets is to do this real-time asset tracking. And for that, it involves these little asset tags and then trying to get those on our bigger devices. So not every device that we have out there, not the load switches, not our detector rack cards, but the cabinet itself, the controllers, the detection devices, the encoders, the switches, anything that we would RMA is kind of where we drew that line. And unfortunately, that ended in this massive list. And if you can imagine, every one of these devices has a different life cycle and a different set of considerations to have. And so it's become a really, really complicated process for us. We've been doing this for years, and we have been largely unsuccessful. Our database is not terribly up to date. And part of that is that we've relied on our technicians who are in the field every day to, as they move devices around the state, to update their location and status in this software we have. Software is not very user-friendly. It's not a quick process for our technicians. And because of that, it's really degraded. And so we're at kind of a tipping point now of deciding where to go with this. Here's a couple things we've learned, and the one I want to highlight is this location numbering convention. It's something we're deploying right now. It's something I've wanted for 8 years, and then I got a promotion that accidentally made it my problem. And so we have these stickers that we're putting out to really just help make sure everybody knows exactly what we're talking about at that location level, because a little bit different than traffic signals, we're working off of mile points, and there's many, many cameras around, and we're finding a lot of confusion about where people were. And so even just trying to figure out where we are, we needed a common language to talk about that. So some next steps, we have hired a consultant to really help us evaluate where we are, where we need to go, and who knew becoming a tier 1 asset came with all these additional questions. And so we're going to kind of work back from those questions and the expectations and our planning process that we'd like to have. And we're going to try and back down into what does that mean on a day-to-day level? Is this real-time asset tracking really a good idea? Or maybe it's just a big waste of time and we'd be better off with a different process. And that ITS master plan that Tyler highlighted, we're really excited about that, but it's not really part of our day-to-day workflow just yet. And so that's another thing that we kind of need to get up to that better level. But in the end, what we're hoping to provide are a good 3-year advanced estimate of the amount of funding we will need to maintain our system. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you for hearing from us, and we're excited for your questions at the end.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Tyler. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Next, we're lucky to have Natalie Becker of the North Central Texas Council of Governments joining us. The North Central Texas Council of Governments serves the Dallas-Fort Worth region by developing transportation plans and programs that address the complex needs of the rapidly growing area. Natalie is currently serving as a senior program manager for congestion management and system operations. This area includes planning in the areas of Tismo, aviation, congestion management, safety, security, special events, public involvement, and marketing. So she's got a lot of hats. Her responsibilities also include coordinating with partner agencies to implement congestion management strategies, traffic signal retiming, ride sharing, incident management, and other demand reduction and operational projects. Natalie's been with NCT COG since May 1999. And she's also active in the transportation profession and has served on the board of professional organizations, including the Women's Transportation Seminar, the Fort Worth section of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and the Texas chapter of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. Natalie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
All right, I'll proceed. So just to give you a little bit of background information, my presentation will be a little bit different than those of the states, although I wish we were in as good a condition as the states were in these asset planning and linking that up to TSMO plans and actually implementing projects. But I'm going to give you some examples of what we're doing in our region that are really project-specific items, but I do want to provide a little bit of background information related to the TSMO plan for our particular region, which was developed by the Texas Department of Transportation. They recently completed that. Earlier this year was actually the sign-off for it. So we've recently completed a TSMO plan just for our region that includes both districts, our Dallas and our Fort Worth districts of TxDOT. Also, from a statewide perspective, they handle that TAM plan for our region. And so we get a lot of our data on bridge and pavement conditions from the state. And then kind of a complement to this that I feel really fits in with this TSMO and TAM type planning exercises that we do is our congestion management process. And we recently completed that just earlier this year as well, where really you look at deficiencies of how the roadway system is operating and you identify TSMO strategies that can be implemented to help solve that problem before we add additional capacity to that particular roadway. So we have a lot of these plans that are working, but I think we definitely have some work to do on how we better integrate those plans in our region in particular. So as I move through this presentation, like I said, I'm going to focus on some specific projects, and some of these projects have come out of our TSMO plan and our congestion management process that really identified a role for the MPO to actually assess these operational assets. And that's why we're playing a role in this, because there's multiple operators of these types of assets, and we need a system that brings all of them together so we can assess it from a regional perspective. So these are very project-specific assessments that I'm going to talk about this afternoon, as soon as I get my slides to advance. So a few things I'm going to talk about are our traffic signal program. That's one that we've recently kind of revamped. We've been working with our partner agencies to identify some items in there that we really want to push forward. Intelligent transportation systems, which Utah had mentioned, they're putting signals under their ITS system. I think they are very much related, especially as you look at integrated corridor management and things like that. You need all of this to work as a system so that we can get traffic through the corridor when crashes occur or other accidents occur on our roadway. I'm also going to talk a little bit about our managed lane coordination, another area we have multiple operators of our managed lanes in our region. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on demand reduction, which is a TSMO strategy, but we don't always hear about it when we have some of these webinars. And so we're looking at assets from two perspectives: an inventory of what we have And two, how are they performing? Are they performing how they should? And this really comes into play with traffic signals and ITS devices, these operational type assets. Are they just changing color, or are they really doing what we need them to do out there on the transportation system? So with our traffic signal inventory, this particular one we started earlier this spring, where we decided that we would identify minimum standards for our region on traffic signals from controllers and cabinets, and what type of communication we want agencies to have to their signals. And the goal behind this is we have a lot of signals in our region, and some are really, really nice, highly sophisticated signals, and some are really in bad shape, and you just hope they survive through the next day. And so our goal is to bring our standards up to at least a minimum, so we can provide that operational options for people out there, because there's some signals we can't even put new timing plans in because the agency's afraid that they're going to crash. And so we're trying to bring all of them up to a minimum standard so they can at least operate as they should be able to operate. And that's really I guess the emphasis behind this traffic signal assessment. So as part of the current assessment, we do have an inventory of all the signals in our region, but it's been at a very high level. Location type information, what city operates it, what county is it in, is it on the TxDOT system, is it off the TxDOT system? So we're moving this inventory to a way more robust system to allow us to understand what equipment is out there and target our federal funds to those signals that need to get upgraded to that minimum standard. And so this is the process that we're going through with our partner agencies. Obviously, we have to have their help to complete these surveys. We do have a consultant on board that's helping us help the cities complete the surveys. But yeah, we're inventorying each signalized intersections. We've developed minimum standards. We currently are putting the survey out there for agencies to actually assess what we have. And over the next couple months, we'll be looking at what data information we got back in terms of what equipment's at each signal, and then identify a program of projects that we're going to put in our transportation improvement program to bring those signals up to that minimum standard. And then our goal is to maintain this system online. And I like what Utah had shown on some of their lessons learned on tracking assets and things to that sort. So hopefully I can reach out to them and learn a little bit more about what we should and shouldn't be doing related to that. But our goal is to maintain it, so that way as things get older, their life cycle is exceeded. How do we have a program that continuously replaces these types of things within our region, so we're not caught in the situation that we're caught in now? This is just a list of things that our partner agencies and the Council of Governments has come up with, the things we want to inventory as part of our assessment that really get after, is the signal capable of adjusting to our traffic conditions within the region, and can it be updated, and new timing plans be entered remotely, or do they have to go out in the field and do that? These are the things we need to know and better understand, so again we can better operate that corridor and better operate that with other corridors within our region. And in addition to that, we also do want to look at surrounding land uses, because a lot of times what we got into some discussion about here in the urban area is different types of equipment as signals might need to be different based on what's next to it. And so us better overlaying this land use and signal location will help us better implement those types of strategies along different corridors, so that we can be responsive to the users of that system out there. So we will be looking at land use, these railroad track crossings, bike and pedestrian type trails and facilities, and seeing how we can implement the right technology in the right location, rather than just a blanket across the whole region that maybe isn't needed in some areas. In addition to signals, which is our big effort, we also collect intelligent transportation system asset inventory from our partner agencies, so we can have a comprehensive look of what technology is out there. And so the agencies that we actually collect this information from include our North Texas Tollway Authority, our TxDOT, Texas Department of Transportation, our Dallas and our Fort Worth district. And then we also have some private sector partners that operate some of TxDOT's roadways that we collect this information from as well. And this information just really consists of closed circuit television cameras, the dynamic message signs, the side fire locations, satellite buildings, and then the type of communication that they have out there. Another item that we do on the performance side of things is look at these side fire devices and ensure that they're collecting traffic volumes for us. So we work very closely in partnership with TxDOT to make sure those are operating to their full potential, because we use those volumes in our planning process to help validate our travel models that we implement. So it's really important to us to have that work accurately. So we spend a little money in partnership with TxDOT to review those, the data that comes from those devices, and make sure that they're accurately reflecting what's happening out there on the roadway. Another area that I wanted to touch on that, again, we play a role is more on the multiple operators, managed lanes. Within our region, you see the map up here that I've provided, but we are trying to build a management lane system within our region. And this really, our role is to just make sure things are operating properly between the different agencies. We have consistent policies, consistent operating hours, and then really some of the stuff that comes into play with the Council of Governments is we're the ones that offset the cost for high occupant vehicle discounts. And so we're interested in understanding how these lanes operate to make sure that we can apply a discount properly during the peak period. And we want to make sure that the rates that are charged during different times of day are following the policies that our policy board has set for the region. And another area that I wanted to touch on slightly, I don't have a lot of slides on this, is our trip reduction program. So another type of TSMO strategy that looks at reducing the demand on the transportation system. We do operate that for the region to try to promote reduction in this particular area. We recently had a resolution adopted by our policy board to reduce single occupant trips by 20% to try to sustain what has happened with COVID and see how long we can possibly sustain that reduction in single occupant trips. Because I know, as everybody has seen, your traffic patterns are changing. They're starting to come back to where they might have been pre-COVID. But how can we sustain what we were able to do during COVID, make lemonade out of lemons, and get some additional capacity out of our system by encouraging folks either to telecommute or carpool, ride transit, bike, and things like that within our region. These are the types of things that we track and monitor within our region to try to promote those types of activities other than driving by yourself in your vehicle is really what we're after. And then I do want to touch a few items on the asset performance side. So again, we look at what assets do we have, and then in actuality, we do want to look at performance measures that tell us how are they performing, because they may change color like signals do, but they may not be performing that well. So we are working to procure an asset performance platform for traffic signals, and this will look at some device uptime and validation checks, but it's also going to look at things like intersection delay, our red-green ratio, travel times and speeds, things to that sort that really allow us to assess, is the signal working efficiently? Or if it's not, maybe it just needs to be retimed. So we're looking at it from the equipment standpoint. Is the equipment able to do the job it should be able to do? And then the performance standpoint, is it operating to its full potential? And that's really what we're trying to get after in our signal program and our ITS system. A few things that we do track on our managed lanes, again, we want to make sure they're operating as efficiently as possible. So things that we do track on these particular lanes deal with transactions. We also look at events that are over or under 35 miles per hour, because we have a policy that is associated with that, as well as the number of folks that are HOVs that use that particular lane. A few things we track on auto occupancy. So we do have a program within our region that actually identifies the number of people in the car, so we can apply the right toll rate during the AM and PM peak periods. So within our region, we provide a 50% discount on our managed lane system if there are 2 or more people in the car. And so we use the Go Karma system to actually identify those users. We've integrated it with our back office tolling agency, and then we just apply the right toll to the right vehicle based on were they an HOV or were they not an HOV. So this is some of the information on, these were users that signed up in September, but there's a very easy to use dashboard that allows us to pull this information and understand how many of the folks that are using the lanes are actually HOV users on our system. Again, looking at the demand side of the Tismo strategies. And this is just the information that we're able to collect through our truck parking program that allows us to track different types of modes and the usage of those modes by different users. And that is all that I have for today. I went through, again, my focus was a lot on projects we're implementing. Hopefully we get to the point we can integrate a lot of these plans together and come up with a more Tismo and TAM integrated plan for our region, and then really identify projects we can implement, and then also look at like before and after conditions of these different items that we're implementing within our region. So I'll turn it back over to you all. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that about all that information about your region. And I think at this point I can turn it over to Matt, who can lead us through some of the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much. Wow, great series of presentations. Thank you very much to all of the presenters for your remarks today. I think it really gave us a lot to kind of think about. I'm seeing a few questions sort of popping in to the Q&A pod here. So do want to also make sure to thank all of you, the attendees, for being here today. Although we do have a few questions coming in, we got a good 18 minutes or so before this webinar concludes. So don't be shy. If you have a question, go ahead and type it right into that Q&A pod there, and we'll be happy to try to bring those up to our distinguished panel here to provide some comments back on. And as was mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to be wearing 2 different hats here. I'm not only moderating the session, but I'm also will do my best to answer any of the questions you might have about Director Marlar's comments earlier about the Iowa DOT. So anyway, with that, let's kind of jump right in to the Q&A. One of the early questions that we had was about kind of looking at the gamut of different assets that could be included under the umbrella of kind of ITS or Tismo assets, including things like field devices, communications infrastructure, power infrastructure, that kind of thing. What about going beyond the highway infrastructure into the other things that are not on the highway, like computer hardware, software, the TMC itself, or facilities like that, other remote access points that are related to maintenance operation, or even some of the in-vehicle stuff. So I think we heard a little bit about that, the different types of hardware and so forth that are related to some of the ITS and Tismo activities. But for the agencies that are involved in the discussion today, have you been thinking about going kind of beyond the stuff that's on the highway and thinking about including those assets that are being described there? Maybe I'll ask my colleagues at UDOT first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we've definitely had those conversations, when we've been trying to figure out what exactly should we be tracking. And, the software side of things is definitely an important piece in our ITS system in particular, and or our ITS assets, I should say. We kind of have stepped back from that. It's kind of on the back burner a little bit because we feel like there's a lot we still need to do to manage the actual field assets, and that's kind of been our focus. But it's certainly a valid topic of conversation. What else do we need to track? What else do we need to manage? Jamie, do you have any thoughts along those lines?
I would say that, this has actually been a really big thing for us with our ATMS and our camera system, because our cameras are really old, they're analog. We want to get a new ATMS, but it requires changing so many things at once. And so that transition has been really hard. And fortunately, we're to the point where our ATMS is so terrible that we've made it a priority. And so not a great strategy, but effective, I guess.
Worst first, huh?
So I will say, going back to our ATMS, we did get special funding to replace it this past fiscal year. But the more important thing that we got from that, and it was because of this conversation around managing it as an asset, was yearly funding to actually maintain it. And that's something that we haven't had previously. So again, I think, in that regard, yes, that is definitely something that we should be talking about as an asset that needs dedicated funding and needs to be maintained.
Natalie, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I'll just add, so from the signal perspective, obviously we have a lot of different operating systems within our region. So we do track the central operating systems for the traffic signals, because we do need to integrate those so we can share that information across jurisdictional boundaries. I will say that both our TxDOT districts and our Tollway Authority, luckily, use the same traffic management center software, Lone Star software. So that has helped a lot by allowing those agencies to be integrated from the limited access perspective. But we do still have some work to do on integration on the arterial side. But we do track the traffic signal central operating systems for our partner agencies.
Okay, great. Natalie, this question for you from Chris, asking about the CMP and Tismo plan, and the regional CMP versus the Tismo plan. And he's asking, how do those two different, or he or she, I'm sorry, I'm not sure, Chris, sorry. How do the two differ? How do those two plans differ?
So I'll describe it briefly, but Joe might have some comments to this too. But how I see it within our region is the Tismo plan is looking at it from a regional perspective, where CMP really gets down to the corridor level and identifies what specific strategy can be implemented on that corridor based on what deficiencies that corridor has. So the Tismo, we're looking, what all programs do we want to do from a regional perspective and what's needed from the regional perspective, but it doesn't identify what specific corridor area where you would actually implement that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I mean, and with Tismo plans, I mean, it's flexible depending on the jurisdiction of the agency. I know with Natalie's situation, I mean, you have the Dallas and the Fort Worth area. That's two TxDOT districts as well, and tons of local agencies. So, I mean, it doesn't really, the plan that she has doesn't really get down into that level of detail, but just is more encompassing. Just trying to put it all together.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One thing I will add, just because I had trouble with my mic on the last question in terms of, what qualifies as an asset or what does. I know, and I don't know if Steve Gay's on, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know, like, in terms of the federal legislation, I know in terms of defining an asset, it usually, if I recall right, I mean, it talks about an asset in terms of having a physical dimension and within the highway right of way as well. So that can be add a little bit of complication when you start talking about the TMC and the software and even data. I've heard that people try to argue that data itself is an asset, which depending on your point of view, I mean, you can argue for and against that. But I mean, obviously, when we talk about asset management, you start out with certain parameters. Not to say that data and software and everything else that's mentioned should not be managed from a life cycle standpoint, but there's always opportunities for collaboration within these assets as well. And basically you just have to start at some point.
Yeah, you know, kind of shifting my hat from moderator to panelist, I will sort of say, you know, it was definitely a hard line in Iowa where anything that was not sort of a public use asset, in other words, something that the public wanted us to provide, was not considered something that we would you know, put under the umbrella of transportation asset management. Not that those things aren't important, but and don't need to be managed, but just from the framework of TAM, it didn't make a lot of sense. But then I don't remember exactly which agency it was, but one of the agencies made this argument about the ATMS in particular, and how that's really, you know, a public use type of non-physical asset, and you know, then that kind of left me scratching my head a little bit, going, well, geez, is that bright line still as bright as I thought it was? So you know, I don't know that we have totally an answer for that question either, but it's definitely as we move more into how information about the system being as important as the use of the system, it gets harder and harder to kind of draw that line of kind of what is the actual asset that we're managing. I don't know, I think we have the answer, but that's something we'll continue to explore the frontiers of, I think, in the future. So, okay. So other questions, I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's see here. One that this might be kind of a simple one for Utah. There's at least one other state who's interested in checking out that form that you had for your operations review. I think several states might be interested in seeing that. Can you comment a little bit, maybe Tyler, about sort of what was the genesis behind that process, and kind of how you came to you know, what you were describing there in terms of that form?
Yeah, so, and I think a lot of DOTs, and especially people in the ITS world, can relate to this. You know, we have really fought over the years to try and get ITS and operations included in traditional projects. And, you know, it's oftentimes we weren't hearing about projects until very late in the game, and we try and, you know, request certain things to be included, and it was, you know, budget was already set, scope was already set. It was just very difficult to really get included at the table there. And so we saw a real need for us to implement something that would get started very early on in the project process. And that was, you know, the impetus for us creating this simple checklist that we could put out there. We wanted it to be something simple, not, you know, overly complicated, overly, you know, bureaucratic or whatever, however you want to word it, but just something we could hand to them. And it's essentially 2 pages. Look through this, check these boxes, and, you know, this will give you a comfort level that your project is appropriately addressing operations. And we've actually gotten really good feedback from it. You know, because a lot of people just aren't sure, you know, what should I be looking at? What should I be considering in my project? And this checklist, you know, the feedback we've gotten, this helps me know that I'm considering the right things. So it's something simple, but we've seen some good dividends from it.
Is it on the website? People want to see it. Tell them how to find it.
So yeah, so Jamie was just asking, you know, how people can access it. I can provide a link to it, and that can get disseminated. I guess Matt, I can get that to you, or who would be the right person to do that, or Joe?
Good question. I think we can add it to the webinar information. Put Perry and say that's something we can do after the fact in the webinar description.
That'll work perfectly, and we can definitely do it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great.
Cool. So, you know, on that topic, I'm going to take moderator prerogative and sort of ask a question that was kind of occurring to me. And this really kind of started with Joe's comments about Tismo really complementing traditional infrastructure investment, and you know, you talked about this two-way street, and I think that's, you know, really kind of an important concept for us to think about as we think about asset management. You know, sort of how these two concepts relate to one another. It kind of goes beyond just the management of those ITS assets or those Tismo assets. It's really about how we can use information about the system. So I appreciate your comments on that. I think, you know, that form that you're talking about, Tyler, or that approach that you're talking about looking at operations approach is definitely something that fits right into that same type of thinking, that, you know, we need to think beyond just the pavement-based solutions to some of our issues, and how we can get better life out of what we already have, and better use out of what we already have. Also thinking about the demand side that Natalie talked about, and how we can bring that into the equation. So let's see, taking a quick look at the other questions here. Yeah, so question about sort of the asset performance data, Natalie. So you had showed some really cool performance measures that the COG uses to kind of help work with your partners. How exactly, or can you describe a little bit more about the process of how that performance data is used and shared among the partners? How do you use that to help you guys make decisions?
Yeah, so our signal performance platform has not been developed yet or procured, whatever it ends up being. But we do envision making that available to our partner agencies. So we would assess it looking at the performance of those signals. They could use it on a daily basis to assess how their signals are performing. If they got a call and maybe they don't have a camera out there, or maybe they could search for their whole jurisdiction and identify signalized locations that maybe show up as red dots, that something might not be working right. They could reach out and use it on a daily basis versus us looking at it from more of a longer term basis to identify what types of projects might need to be implemented on that particular effort. We do utilize travel times and speed data currently, though, to look at identification of bottlenecks, working with our partner agencies to better understand the duration of crashes on our facilities, things to that. Just because we do have so many different jurisdictions, we have so many different agencies that respond to those types of things. So in the same corridor, we might have sections of it that 4 different agencies respond to. And so when those things occur and the backup starts to occur, we need to understand who do we need to reach out to along that facility to see what we can do better next time, or do they need more resources? That maybe that's where COG comes in, because COG doesn't implement any, we don't operate projects, but we provide a funding source and we provide coordination activity to our partner agencies to help them operate the systems that they have. And so that's really where our role comes in, is looking at that, those speed type things, coordinating with our partner agencies, bringing resources to the table to try to help them. And, you know, just how can we all work together to get this system around here to operate as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and if I can just follow up on that, and I don't mean to kind of put you on the spot, but just curious, do you have sort of regular coordination meetings with those partners then, or sort of what does that look like in terms of how you share that information and make those?
Yeah, so for our traffic signal program, we've been meeting with our partner agencies regularly, obviously, as we go through the survey development, and then we'll meet with them on a regular basis to look at the performance of that system. And what else we try to do is on a regular basis, we have traffic incident management teams. Some are by area, some are by corridor. And so we reach out and get feedback from first responders or those folks that are patrolling the area, because they see it every day. So we get some feedback through that mechanism. We also get some feedback from, you know, even just the general public that drives around. They provide those. So we have some recurring meetings that occur, but we also just get a lot of our data from what we hear from different partners, and then we work together to put together a group that talks through those particular items. On the CMP, and specifically those, we have groups because they're corridors that are identified, and we know the partners that are involved in the operation of that corridor. But sometimes they're kind of ad hoc groups based on what we hear or learn from pretty much anybody that's traveling on our system.
Okay. Well, I do notice that we were kind of bumping up against the end of the time here. I want to say a great big thank you to all of our panelists, to Steve and Joe, to Tyler and Jamie, and to Natalie, also to Scott Marlar, who couldn't be with us here today. I'm going to turn it back over to Will for any concluding comments. Thank you so much, everyone. We didn't quite get to all the Q&A. We will definitely try to get some of these remaining questions answered in sort of a follow-up.
Thank you, Matt, for stepping in and taking on those moderating duties as well. So our next webinar will be held in 2 months, specifically on December 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. The topic and presentations will be confirmed shortly. Additional webinars will continue to be scheduled for quite a while, and so please continue to send us ideas for webinars you'd like to see. And on Matt Hardy's behalf, I'll just add a final reminder that for more information, you can always visit the AASHTO TAM portal, and that's found at tam-portal.com. So with that, a thank you to everyone for your attendance and participation.
Thanks, everybody.